Hades, one of the most recognizable names in all of Greek mythology, almost always associated with the realm of the dead, he became known as the ruler of the underworld, the figure connected to fear, silence, and the final destination of every life. But there's an important detail that many people overlook. Hades didn't create the underworld from nothing, and he didn't begin his story as the king of that realm. So how did Hades actually emerge within Greek mythology? How did he end up ruling the most feared domain of all? And perhaps even more importantly, how did this underworld truly function? Because, contrary to what many people imagine, it wasn't simply a place of death. To the ancient Greeks, the underworld was a complete realm with laws, crossings, guardians, judgments, and different regions where every soul followed a path from which there was no return. In this video, you'll discover not only the origin of Hades, but also what the most mysterious realm in all of Greek mythology was really like. Whenever Hades is mentioned, he's usually surrounded by a ready-made image, the god who rules the dead and inhabits the most feared place in Greek mythology. But when you look more closely at the story, it becomes clear that he represents far more than that. Hades isn't just a figure connected to death. He is part of a much larger structure, a worldview in which life, power, destiny, and justice were deeply connected. Throughout this video, the story unfolds in two parts that complete one another. First, we have to go back to the beginning and understand how Hades was born into one of the most violent and unstable families in mythology, leading to the moment when the universe itself was divided among the great gods. Then the focus shifts to the realm he came to rule, revealing how this underground world functioned, a place that wasn't merely darkness, but a domain with its own structure, its own rules, and its own logic, organizing the fate of every soul. And that's what makes this story so fascinating. When Greek mythology talks about Hades, it's not just describing a god sitting alone on a throne. It's revealing how the ancient Greeks understood death, what they believed happened to the soul after life ended, and how the universe itself needed to remain in balance. The underworld wasn't a dark footnote hidden deep within the myths. It was an essential part of the cosmic order that held everything together. But before we can understand how that realm worked, there's an unavoidable question. How did Hades end up there in the first place? Because the story of the Lord of the Underworld doesn't begin among the dead. It begins much earlier, inside a family defined by fear, violence, and a prophecy powerful enough to reshape the fate of the universe. The story of Hades begins long before he ever ruled the underworld. He was the son of Cronus and Rhea, and the brother of Zeus, Poseidon, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia. But unlike what many people might imagine, he wasn't born into a peaceful world of power. Even though his family was one of the most powerful in Greek mythology, it was already surrounded by fear and violence. His father Cronus was haunted by a prophecy. One day he would be overthrown by one of his own children, just as he had overthrown his own father Uranus. Terrified of this fate, Cronus made a brutal decision. Every time Rhea gave birth, he swallowed the child immediately after it was born. That's what happened to Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. Hades therefore didn't begin his story as a powerful ruler. He began as another victim of Cronus's fear. Everything changed when Zeus was born. Rhea, exhausted from losing her children, decided to save him. Instead of handing the baby to Cronus, she gave him a stone wrapped in cloth. Zeus was hidden away and raised far from his father. When he became strong enough, he returned to challenge Cronus, and in doing so he freed his siblings, including Hades, who was finally able to return to the world. After their liberation, Hades joined Zeus and Poseidon in the great war against the Titans, known as the Titanomachy. This was the battle that determined who would rule the universe. During the war, the three brothers received powerful weapons forged by the Cyclopes. Zeus received the thunderbolt, Poseidon the trident, and Hades received the helm of invisibility, an artifact that allowed him to disappear from the sight of gods and enemies alike. This detail is important because it perfectly foreshadows the role he would later take. While Zeus represented the power of the sky and Poseidon the force of the seas, Hades carried a quieter and more hidden power. His weapon didn't stand out through lightning or destruction, but through the ability to act unseen, something that fits perfectly with the realm he would later rule. When the Titans were defeated, The time came to divide the cosmos. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades cast lots to determine who would rule each domain. Zeus received the sky, Poseidon the seas, and Hades was given the underworld. This is a crucial point. Hades didn't end up there because of cruelty or punishment. The realm of the dead became his legitimate share in the new order of the universe, and that is how Hades became the absolute ruler of the underworld, not because he chose it out of malice, but because it became his role in maintaining the balance of the cosmos. But from that moment, another question naturally arises. What exactly was this realm he came to govern? Because the Greek underworld was far more complex than most people imagine. Once we understand how Hades became king of this realm, an even more interesting question appears. What exactly was the underworld to the Greeks? Many people imagine the underworld as something similar to later concepts of hell, a place created only for punishment and suffering. But for the Greeks, the underworld was much broader than that. It was the destination of almost every soul after death. In other words, it wasn't a place reserved only for those who had committed terrible crimes. It was the realm where the dead almost inevitably went. This changes how we see the entire concept. The underworld wasn't simply a place of suffering, it was part of the natural order of the universe. Just as there were the heavens, the oceans, and the land of the living, there was also the realm of the dead. Each part of the cosmos had its role, and the underworld was the domain that received those who had left life behind. The Greeks imagined this place as a real world within their mythology, a hidden kingdom, deep and separated from the living, governed by its own rules. It wasn't emptiness, and it wasn't simply an end. It was a new domain where the soul continued to exist under a different order, and that's what makes the underworld so fascinating. It shows that for the Greeks, death wasn't simply disappearance. It was a transition from one world to another. It meant leaving behind everything that belonged to life and entering a realm governed by its own laws, limits, and ruler. That's why the underworld was more than a dark place. It was a central part of how the Greeks understood death and human destiny. But if every soul had to reach this realm, then another question arises. How did that journey actually happen? In Greek mythology, there's an important distinction that many people confuse. Hades wasn't the god of death. He was the ruler of the underworld. The one who represented death itself was Thanatos, the personification of peaceful death. That means Hades wasn't the one traveling through the world taking people's lives. His role began afterward, once the soul had already left the world of the living. For the Greeks, this moment wasn't seen as simple disappearance. Death was the beginning of a journey. When life came to an end, the soul had to travel toward the underworld, and it didn't make that journey alone. First came the act of death itself, represented by Thanatos. Then appeared one of the most famous figures in this mythology, Charon, the ferryman responsible for carrying souls across the waters that led to Hades' realm. That's why the Greeks had the custom of placing a coin with the dead. The coin served as payment for the crossing. Without it, the soul could not find rest. In many myths, those who died without proper burial or without the coin were forced to wander between worlds, unable to complete the journey. This reveals something important. In Greek belief, the passage to the underworld had to happen correctly. Dying wasn't enough. You had to arrive. For them, death wasn't the immediate end of everything. It was the beginning of a one-way journey, filled with steps, rituals, and sacred rules. Once a soul reached the realm of Hades, it entered a world far from empty or undefined. In Greek mythology, the underworld had its own geography. It was a realm with paths, borders, rivers, entrances, and different regions. A true territory within the mythological imagination. One of the most striking features of this world were its rivers. Each carried its own meaning. The Styx was one of the most sacred and feared, associated with oaths so powerful that even the gods dared not break them. The Acheron was linked to sorrow and the passage of souls. The Cocytus represented lamentation and grief. The Phlegethon was described as a river of fire, and the Lethe had an especially symbolic role. Its waters caused souls to forget the memories of their previous life. These rivers reveal how the Greeks imagined the underworld as a place filled with meaning, where each element symbolized emotions, destinies, and experiences of the soul after death. The realm also had gates and guardians. Among them, none was more famous than Cerberus, the multi-headed dog that guarded the entrance to the underworld. His job wasn't to let the dead enter, but to prevent them from leaving. This reinforced a central idea of Greek mythology. Entering the underworld was inevitable, but escaping it was another story entirely. And once inside, not all souls went to the same place. The underworld was divided into three major regions: the Asphodel Meadows, Tartarus, and the Elysian Fields. In the Greek underworld, not every soul shared the same fate. After arriving in Hades' realm, there was still a decisive step: judgment. This responsibility belonged to judges connected to the underworld, most famously Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. According to Greek tradition, they evaluated the souls and determined where each one belonged. Ordinary souls, neither especially virtuous nor deeply wicked, were sent to the Asphodel Meadows. Souls guilty of grave crimes or extreme wrongdoing could be cast into Tartarus, the most feared region of the underworld. And those considered exceptional, heroes or individuals greatly favored by the gods, might reach the Elysian Fields, a far more blessed destination. This reveals something fascinating. The underworld followed a moral logic, though not exactly the same kind of moral system seen in later traditions. It wasn't a simple division between good and evil. It was about the weight of a life lived and the place each soul occupied within the cosmic order. Hades ruled his realm very differently from many other Greek gods. He wasn't a deity constantly involved in conflicts or frequently appearing among the living. His role was to maintain order in the kingdom of the dead. While Zeus often appeared impulsive and powerful in the heavens, Hades was firm, distant, and controlled. His authority didn't need constant displays of force. It rested on his absolute rule over his domain. His duty was to ensure that souls remained where they belonged, and that the boundary between the living and the dead was respected. In this sense, Hades was less a tyrant and more a guardian of cosmic balance. The underworld didn't function through Hades' authority alone. An entire structure existed around him, with many important figures maintaining order in that realm. The most important figure beside him was Persephone, the queen of the underworld. Her presence strengthened the kingdom and symbolized the connection between two worlds, the living world above and the realm of the dead below. Charon ferried souls across the waters. Cerberus guarded the entrance. The Erinyes, or Furies, represented forces of vengeance and punishment, especially for severe crimes such as betrayal within one's own family. Together, these figures formed the structure that kept the underworld functioning as an organized kingdom. After understanding how the underworld worked, it becomes easier to see something important. It wasn't merely a place of terror. For the Greeks, it was above all a realm of order. Yes, the underworld inspired fear. It was tied to death, the unavoidable end of life. But it also served a clear purpose in Greek mythology. It was the destination of the dead and the realm that ensured the separation between the living and the dead. Without it, the cosmic balance would collapse. In the end, Hades is far from being just a villain surrounded by shadows. His story begins as one of Cronus's children, trapped from birth in a family marked by fear and violence, and continues until he becomes the ruler of one of the most important realms in Greek mythology. The underworld wasn't simply a place of horror. It was an organized world, with laws, crossings, judgments, guardians, and different destinies for every soul. And Hades wasn't death itself, but the ruler responsible for maintaining order in the realm, where all life eventually ends. When we look more closely at this story, it becomes clear that Hades may be one of the most misunderstood gods in Greek mythology. He didn't represent chaos, he represented limits. He didn't represent whim, he represented function. And the underworld, as frightening as it seemed, existed because the Greeks believed that even death had to be part of a greater order. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the origins of Hades and the mysteries of the underworld, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can keep exploring the most fascinating stories from Greek mythology.